So, welcome everybody to TAD Talks Towards Authentic Dialogue. My name is Yugala-kishor Das here with Bhaktirasa, and our guest today is Balaram Das. Balaram is from New Zealand. He has his family there in the South Island, two teenagers, and his wife, Ratirupa. And he's a veteran of Bhakti. He's been around for about 20 or so years, been married for, I think he said his 17-year anniversary was just last weekend. So last week. So that's pretty amazing. And we want to really pick his brain and heart a little on what it takes to stay in a committed relationship and what is the relationship of family life to spiritual progress on the path of bhakti. So without further ado, Balaram, say a little bit more about why you come today and the topic.
Okay, thank you, Hugo, and thank you, Bhaktirasa. So, yeah, I really just felt the need to raise this subject matter. It's something I've already been thinking about and talking about for quite a while, and raising the idea that, well, I guess addressing some of the what I would call toxic ideas around relationships, around marriage, and or grahasta life, or whatever you want to call it, and that I feel like we still, we have a culture within the Bhakti society. You know, I think we need to call it the Bhakti society because it's not an issue that belongs to only one particular sangha or institution. And at least in my limited observation, it seems to be a recurring theme across all Gaudiya sanghas and apparently other religions altogether as well, based on some of my recent conversations. But yeah, just addressing this idea that marriage is some kind of concession because we failed at the real thing. Either maybe we were previously a brahmachari and then we quote unquote fell down from the brahmachari ashram and had to, walk with our tail between our legs into the grihasta ashram. And I mean, that in itself is still a culture, at least in some parts of the Gaudiya world. There are definitely places that have made a huge amount of progress in, changing the stigma around changing ashrams, I guess, for lack of, to use the kind of the old school terminology. But there are definitely still some parts of the Gaudiya world that have a pretty unhealthy culture around, joining changing ashrams, leaving brahmachari life and getting married, or I guess this idea that eventually you have to leave your grahasta ashram and become a sannyasi so that you can get back to doing the real thing, which I know that culture is still around, and I've heard it even in just recent months from somebody who will not be named. But yeah, I mean, I just find that really unfortunate because then the whole time that you're married and you're in family life, you're kind of just feeling like, oh, I'm doing this kind of like consolation prize kind of bhakti because I'm too weak or too kind of unqualified to do the real thing. And
Too fallen, Balaram, just admit it. Too fallen.
I'm definitely fallen. I got no problem to say that. But aren't we all fallen? Isn't that why we like Mahaprabhu? Because he's Patita Pavana. I mean, we are just by nature fallen. So yeah. But yeah, this idea that marriage is a concession.
So where do you think that where do you think that notion started? We hear the idea that that's the way Vedic society always has been, but then also we acknowledge that we were not born into any form of Vaishnava family or Vedic culture per se. So where do you think that this understanding that family life is lower started or comes from?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And, I can only put forward a few theories based on conversations that I've had. And I mean, to give credit to somebody like Radha, he's certainly spoken on the subject matter already and made quite a strong case, at least historically, about, I believe it was I think he uses the term Shramana, and I won't claim to know anything about that. I would say for anybody who wants to know more, best they talk to him or listen to him speaking on it. But there does seem to be some kind of historical influence of saying that basically renounced life, or shall we say sannyas life, sannyas ashram is the ultimate form of existence, and everything else is just kind of a temporary kind of state of illusion that you're in until you get to the real thing. I mean, I do feel like there's maybe also a historical influence coming from, say, Shankaracharya and radical Advaita Vedanta, which is very much like this idea that you live in some kind of varnashram system, but then eventually you have to leave it all and become a sannyasi, and that's when your spiritual life begins. And I can't help but feel like that has influenced bhakti, that idea has influenced Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Just this promotion that that's somehow the real thing and everything else is kind of just a second prize because you can't do the real thing. But also, I mean, recently I had the great pleasure of hosting, a priest, a Catholic priest who stayed with us in our home, and I got kind of a crash course in ancient Catholicism, and seeing, I was raising all of these issues with him, and he was saying, yes, we have the same culture in our church of promoting that, basically being a priest is the real thing and everything else is kind of the second prize. And he wasn't saying that like it was a good thing, because he and I unfortunately I spaced out and forgot to get the reference, but he was quoting this beautiful verse from the Old Testament, basically glorifying married life, and especially like the intimate side of married life. And it was you may know the story, Yugal. I know you have quite a strong background in Christianity, but it was about a lady who she had been married 7 times, but on her wedding night, when she was supposed to consummate the marriage, like a demon would come or something and actually kill her husband, and so then she would have to get married again, and it took 7 or 8 attempts of getting married, and then she prayed to God sincerely, and then I don't know what he did, he got rid of the demon or something. And anyway, following that is a whole lot of verses basically glorifying their romantic relationship, their sincerity, and praising their wedding night. And I thought that was I was surprised to be learning about this from a Catholic priest and a celibate, but he was sharing some insight into that. And yeah, I mean, I think any mainstream religion that has kind of a celibate class has been plagued with similar problems to Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and that's kind of a separate topic. I don't want to, get into that, but there was even a time. Sorry.
It's okay. I'm also seeing things that are quite closer in our own history. Not necessarily the origin of how renunciation became idealized, but also like the emphasis on masculinity versus femininity, and how the feminine is kind of looked down upon, and also anything that is, about like otherworldly and transcendent. So like those concepts, I think, really affect our um, orientation towards married life. Like a woman is something bad, fallen, lower. If you have to associate with that, that must mean if you're a guy, then you're attracted to something that's lower, that's lesser, that's not spiritual. So I think it has a lot to do with our approach and acceptance of masculine and femininity also. The divine feminine is pushed away, pushed down, along with this whole material world as being something that needs to be gotten rid of quickly. So anything that has to do with the senses or the body or beauty or anything here is something that is looked down upon and is considered a distraction for our spiritual life, as opposed to embracing our humanity, our fullness, our wholeness, and seeing it as one integrated project, and not seeing it
Yeah.
as something separate. My my emotional life is not separate from my devotional life. My feelings, my sensibilities about things, um, how I walk in the world is not separate from my spiritual life, and it's not something that's wrong. So I
Yeah.
think that whole
Yeah.
orientation to the otherworldly, transcendent, and the hyper masculine, linear kind of aggressive even mentality towards spiritual life, renunciation, hardship, that type of
Yeah,
stance.
I mean, it's a real, yeah. It's kind of this results based spirituality. We do this and we do this,
Yeah.
and if this thing gets in the way, we remove it. And yeah, I mean, as a man, I would say everything you just raised is true. And yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, I wouldn't. I'm really just learning in the last few years even how to kind of work with my emotions and embrace them, and because I was always seeing those as kind of an obstacle to my spiritual life.
And women too. I
And
mean, we were taught that also. We were we were taught that as well. And the larger society, with women's liberation and things and that, the tendency is to idolize the masculine, idolize the
Yep.
male
You can
traits.
see that in popular culture, of course.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
it's almost like women have to match the sort of debauchery of the male archetype now. This defunct male archetype. You can see it in certain kinds of music that now to be you know, a strong, independent, maybe that's not the right way to say it, a sort of badass chick, you have to be just as kind of heartless, just as egocentric, just as toxic, you know. I really appreciate that point, bringing in the relation of the masculine and the feminine to kind of the essence of what family life is, and not just only embodied in two individual opposite gendered people, but the masculine and feminine as they exist within my own self and in relation to others in my family, others in the world itself. Yeah, that's a good point.
So a lot of the myths, I think, that we could address today, a lot of the misconceptions and things that need to be debunked, I think, are all spring from this hyper masculine approach to spirituality.
Yeah.
And whoever doesn't measure up to that image of the renounced straight line, then yeah, you're not really, you don't really cut it.
So let me pitch a kind of myth that I heard in my early days to Balaram. Balaram, so family life is just Maya. Really, all you need is Krishna.
Dark way.
Your mother, your father, they're not really your mother and father. That's just one life cycle out of unlimited. These are just two sticks bumping in the river. Uh, and yeah, ultimately those relationships don't really matter. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, it's all true. I've actually got a dunder waiting for you here when you're ready. You go, you and me. We're gonna go into that. Yeah, I've heard all of those things, and I know those ideas are still being propounded even to this day. But I mean, when you're a young devotee, there's definitely something helpful about taking a little bit of an absolute approach, just to kind of like break free kind of, one way of operating into I definitely feel like there was an overemphasis on renunciation and, monastic life. And so it kind of fueled this fanaticism. Whereas now, I'm trying to really go full circle and even like revisiting some of the ideas that I held when I was a young devotee to try and approach them in a different way. But yeah, there is this real strong myth out there that I, you know, especially like as a man, to view the woman as like Maya personified, and she's just there as like a temptress almost to test your sincerity. Whereas, I've learned so much from my wife and from being married, and it's taken, even after 20 years, I'm only just starting to kind of get in touch with my emotions and, realizing that there's so much that I learned along the way that maybe I was even unaware of it, and being influenced by kind of a male dominated spiritual society. That side of things would have been, you know, downtrodden, and things like emotions were just an obstacle to bhakti. And but bhakti is all about like projects and preaching and getting results and all of these things. Whereas now for me, bhakti is like something that I do in a quiet space, where whether that's with other devotees or whether that's just me and my sadhana, and it's very emotional, and you know and I neglected that side for a long time. And I can honestly say that it's through being married and having an intimate relationship that I've been able to gradually work on these things and actually change both who I am as a person and change my approach to sadhana. And I would say for the better, definitely not for the worse. And I would add to some of your marriage myths. I have, and I don't want to go into all of them, but I certainly have a big long list. But I would say like the number one myth for me, it's kind of a twofold myth. I don't. It's kind of two things in one that I would argue can't be separated. And for me, it's this idea that both emotional and physical intimacy in a relationship is something that is detrimental to your spiritual life and the practice of bhakti. And I'm willing to be labeled, a deviant and a heretic, but I can strongly say, based on my experience and from talking to others, that the importance of this intimacy in a relationship. And I'm not the first person to speak about this, but I've had a lot of conversations somehow in the last 6 months without me seeking them out, almost as if people just intuitively came to me to raise these points. And it was about a lack of either physical or emotional or both, intimacy in their married relationship. And, the various kind of difficulties that was creating in the relationship, the constant tension, people saying to me, oh, I guess it's just time for me to get divorced and take up renounce life again because we couldn't make this thing work. And it's complicated. I'm not going to say, oh, it's just because you didn't do this, and if you just do this, then your relationship will be fixed, because we all bring so much trauma to the relationships. And that before people were practicing bhakti, maybe they had some emotional, physical abuse, and then when they came to bhakti, they kind of mixed that with some quite absolute statements that we find in the Shastra, and then you get this
bypass.
Yeah. You get this seemingly perfect combination of like, well, this thing caused me suffering, and the Shastra says it's all suffering, so it obviously it's just all suffering, and therefore better not to do it. But I honestly don't agree. Not that I don't agree with Shastra, but I don't agree with the way that we have interpreted the Shastra, and I on certain points, and again, I know not everybody is ready to hear this, and dare I say, and I might be putting my head on the chopping block for saying this, but even the way that Shastra has been presented by particular teachers or acharyas, maybe at that time it had good intentions and good purpose, but when we go to follow that and imitate that now, it has kind of the opposite effect. And I think about like the really absolute way in which the philosophy was presented in the 60s and the 70s, and it was probably necessary, looking at the culture, the hippie culture, and a pretty kind of debauched and degraded society.
It was necessary, because the proof of that is that we're here now. So that worked. That worked.
Yeah.
But for the mentality now, it's not working. We've progressed to a certain stage where we need something different.
I wonder how much of these waves are really reactionary. Like the model family in 1950s America, dad has breakfast made in the morning for him, goes to work from 9 to 5 and comes back, and his wife has dinner prepared, and the kids have gone to school and come back. And we've been handed this sort of caricature of what the ideal family situation looks like. And I mean, how much of the hippie movement was a reaction in a protest to that's not really what it is behind closed doors. Actually, there is a lot of toxicity happening in the macro culture. So you have the hippies rejecting almost as a Shramana sort of movement. And then you have a great personality coming and saying, well, if you're already abandoning this thing, then yes, here's your reason to abandon it for a higher purpose. Instead of drugs and sex, drugs, and rock and roll, here's something that's worthy of you renouncing for.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, our culture definitely ties into how we understand scripture and everything, and definitely is embedded. One is embedded with the other, and you can't really separate it. that's why when we look at scripture, we should do so with time, place, and circumstance in mind, because what an acharya will focus on, how it will be presented, will be very much influenced, and it should be, by the culture, because he's speaking to a particular population, a particular set of people, of individuals who have a certain mindset, who have, certain,
Zeitgeist, a certain consciousness.
yeah.
Yeah,
These things, they need to be periodically
right.
visited, because we are different people. We're not the same people. Even if we were back then, we're not the same person than we are as we are now, as we were then. We have a different operating system, basically. So things need to be updated and readdressed.
Yes, it's almost, maybe to put a slightly different language to it, there was good work done in sort of deconstructing, and now's the time to reconstruct in a different image.
Yeah,
Reconstruct family life in a different image.
yeah, exactly. And it's all tied in again. I think with the, renunciation of the world is bad. I think it really starts there. Transcendent, you know, our goal is out there somewhere in a different space, in a different time. We don't even need to consider our humanity at all. So we are coming into a different space with that. Obviously, the zeitgeist is not that anymore. It's integration. It's about fully embracing our humanity within the context of our spirituality, and our
Yeah.
spirituality within the context of our humanity. So the off-boarding things, spiritually bypassing things, it's not working anymore. And more people want conscious living, conscious life, whole life, holistic existence. Um, and we can see judging the tree by the fruit. It's family life within most Gaudiya communities. The divorce rate is horrendous. Most of the kids are a mess. So we can see the result of that.
Yes.
When my daughter was born, she was a girl, so she didn't get the same, she didn't have the same relationship with her father she would have if she was a boy. You know, don't take you hold the daughter in the kirtan and do all that stuff. It's because she was a girl. And I mean, there were so many misconceptions during that time, and it has a huge effect on how our children see the world now, and their own relationships that they're having to deal with.
So maybe you can both speak to this point. You raising another myth in my mind, and this is a big one I've heard. Though, did you want to complete your thought, and I can come back to this myth?
Oh, I'm
Um,
fine.
so the idea that sex is permissible only for the sake of creating children, which is only for the sake of creating Vaishnavas, really. So if you're not going to create little walking and talking Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis, then yes, better to not have children, better to not have physical, intimate relationships, better to be a monk. Can you speak to that, maybe, Balaram?
And not just a
Yeah,
monk, but if you are going to get married, then you should still be a monk.
Right.
Being married, you should still be celibate.
So that's the myth. Let me make it fielded as a easier kind of question for you to launch from. How much in raising your own two children have you felt like you have a role of sort of feeding them their faith versus maybe allowing them to discover for themselves their own faith?
well, that's kind of two different subjects, but so maybe I can speak in regards to the children first, because I think our approach as a family has changed significantly over the course of my children's life. Because when both of my children were born, we had a very active communal kind of morning program, and it was more or less, I'd say more than less expected that you would bring your children to that morning program, and ideally you're, dragging them along to Mongolarity and all of these different things. And yeah, sure, I guess I'm not saying there wasn't any benefit. Over time you see that the children lose interest, or that they just feel like they're being made to do it mechanically. How many times have we heard like somebody saying, I was raised in a Christian family and I was forced to go to church, and then as soon as I was old enough I stopped going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I kind of felt like that might be coming with our children. And so I kind of just took, and it's an evolving thing. I'm not presenting a solution, but what I've, observed from raising my own children is that I have to give them enough freedom to kind of become their own person and allow their devotion or their spiritual life to develop in its own way. If I impose it on them, I really don't feel any value in that. I don't feel like it will be natural. So, they can't avoid it. They live in my house. And, we're still, we had this conversation almost on a daily basis. I'm like, Dad, I'm hungry. Are these peanuts offered? Can I eat them? No, they're not offered. You'll need to offer them. Okay, all right, I'll do it. And they might not. They might be doing it just kind of out of obligation, but the culture is there in the house. They just become accustomed to that, and we like to take them to India. We've been to Vrindavan at least three times. I've taken my children to Vrindavan. And if I said to them, "Oh, I want to go back this year," and let's all go, they'll be happy to get on that flight with me and go. They might have their own reasons for it. My son's into bodybuilding and working out. For him, going to Vrindavan means finding the local gym and pumping iron with the brunch buses, but whatever, I'm happy with that. If that makes him want to go to Vrindavan, I'm okay with that. Yeah. So I'm really just taking the approach now of letting my children, become their own person. And I hope that Bhakti will be part of that. But to be honest, I'm more concerned right now with them becoming a healthy, emotionally balanced individual. If they take up Bhakti but they're super dysfunctional and have mental health problems, which unfortunately, second generation devotees have been plagued by, I don't want that for my children. I'd rather they didn't practice Bhakti than just have a life of trauma and mental dysfunction. So, that's my approach. Take it or leave it, as you like. That's how I'm approaching it now, and I feel like it's working much better.
That's such a huge statement, and I hope it creates the necessity of a solution where there's not just two choices, where we are where we either force our children and create a generation of neurotic people, or we don't bother at all, So hopefully there's a way that we that we ourselves orient ourselves towards bhakti in such a way and become an actual practitioner, that these practices and our life and our heart and the way that we are becomes attractive to our own children, and it
Yeah.
becomes a way that, wow, I want to see the world like that. I want to have a relationship with God like that. I want to be active in my prayer life like that. I want to feel alive the way they do, and be the good kind of person that they are. And so hopefully, as you know, we can become the type of people that they would want to be, in a way that it makes bhakti an attractive thing, and not something like, oh my gosh, if I end up like that by practicing bhakti, I don't want anything to do with bhakti. So I think we've given them so many examples of that. Um, but
We're
now,
so fortunate that our lineage has examples, right? Of course, I think of the stalwart Bhaktivinoda Thakur, um, and it's just simply not the case with so many other, especially I'll say Christian and maybe even Buddhist lineages. Um, they kind of, saffron wash family out of the story. Jesus is considered almost to be a sort of singular entity. The virgin birth is so hyper mythologized. Yeah, that it's as if there was really no family here down on earth. It was all kind of ethereal. Same with the Buddha. Okay, yeah, there was a family behind this prince, but the answer was in leaving the family, not in coming back or not in staying. Um, that I don't think that's the case so much as in Judaism, and I definitely don't think that's the only strand within most of Hindu, the various Hindu traditions and religions and lineages. Um, but I think it's so important that we tell the story of the coming back. You know, if we're relativizing family in one sense to say there's something beyond, or there's something at the heart of that we need to leave to realize what it is. And we just need to tell that story about coming back a little bit more, maybe a lot.
Mm.
yeah, it's about finding the spirituality within the material, not finding it outside and separate from it. And it's a good point that you made about Christ, because Jesus, I mean, as far as I've understood, is, his one of the huge messages is God and uniting with humanity. It's
Yeah.
God taking on a form of humanity.
Yes.
So often we cut out the human aspects of things when we think of Christ. We think of the supernatural stuff that he did, but not necessarily in conjunction with his humanity. So again, it's kind of like some subtle thing.
Right.
Transcendent
Right.
is
And
better.
then look to the miracles, these sort of supernatural things. Who is he serving in these miracles? The orphan, the widow, the elderly.
Mhm.
He's not serving the even his own disciples. He's basically saying, it's not what you think it is.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, the marginalized.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But important points that all, I think, have an influence on how we perceive and orient ourselves towards married life and towards each other. We spiritually bypass our own needs, our own necessities, our own humanity. So, of course, anything that's related to our humanity is going to be considered something that is spiritually bypassable, that it should be bypassed, that it is something that is a detour, so you take a bypass around it. But it's within these things. They're here for a reason. It's within relationship that we find the self, that we can come in contact with the self, as you were saying, Balaram, is how much you have benefited by your relationship with your wife, coming in contact with your own feminine side, your own emotions, which is what bhakti is all about. And the spiritual world are planets of of love. It's emotion. Everything is emotion. So to think that emotion here, where I am, exactly where I am, that emotion is bad and should be rejected for the sake of for cognitive A plus B equals C, then yeah, it's we're kind of missing a main element of our own practice.
I mean, ultimately, we're trying to have an intimate emotional relationship with God. That's what bhakti is. We're not trying to go Golok or Vaikuntha. That's not actually the purpose of bhakti. It really doesn't matter where you are. You're just trying to have this deep emotional connection with God. And I guess to kind of address some of the other questions raised, I would say, I would make the case that how could you pursue an intimate emotional relationship with God unless you already had a taste of what an intimate relationship is like?
Yeah.
And so then these intimate relationships that you're cultivating in this life, in the quote unquote material world, these are giving you a taste of what it means to have intimacy, or what it means to like serve and love somebody unconditionally as well. But yeah, I mean, when I was definitely in my early days of married life, I was kind of living this duality of like, there's my, all my sense desires that I want to satisfy, and that's kind of one half of my life. And then there's this other thing going on, which is my spiritual life. And they're almost like two unrelated activities that I'm doing at the same time. And yeah, the longer that I've been married, the more that I'm trying to bring these two things together and not make a distinction. And that whether I'm spending time with my family or, sitting quietly chanting my japa, these both need to be part of my sadhana. I want to move away from this idea that sadhana is something that just happens with the bead bag and kind of in the temple room, and then when the sadhana is done, then you go and get on with your material life. And I'm not saying I've done this perfectly. This is just an ongoing question for me, actually, is like, how do I bring these two things together? But I'm convinced that the two things do go together. And maybe it will take me another 17 or 37 years of marriage to fully understand how those things fit together. But, I'm realizing more and more that these two things are interwoven. So, my relationship with my wife, my relationship with my children, even like my need to work and make money, these all actually need to be part of the sadhana practice. And I think, previously for me, it was like I'm doing business, so I'm working or I'm making money so that will serve my sadhana practice. But I want to get to the point where even what I'm doing to make money and support myself, I have the same kind of meditative kind of intentional state that I have when I'm sitting down chanting my japa, just to be fully present and to be fully focused. And yeah, let's see. It's an experiment as much as anything. But but I'm willing to pursue that because I don't think that the previous narrative works, basically. And if I was just trying to continue to practice and live spiritual life the way that I understood it 20 years ago, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have continued my practice. So, maybe that's just me. Maybe I just failed, and that's
And
why
I don't
I've
think
had.
it's just you. I don't think it's
That's
just.
why I've had to speculate and concoct a new philosophy where I can justify all my sense gratification. I mean, that's one of the myths in itself, right? But yeah, I mean,
There's also a sort of myth, or a psychological theory, I might say, that the Catholic Church is the perfect place for sexually perverse men to find refuge because they're under the cloak of perfection. They're under the cloak of celibacy. They're under the cloak of monasticism. And we see so many crimes have been perpetrated under that cloak. So it's almost like the perfect closet to hide in.
but of course, based on speaking to my friend who was here recently, that you can name any issue that the Gaudiya community faces, or and the Catholic community faces the same thing, and vice versa. And my friend was just saying to me, I feel like we're just talking about the same organization. It's the same issues, and which need to be addressed, and and even like the stigma around sexuality is something that's being kind of revisited by the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't know, for those of you who are fans of Monty Python, they portray quite a particular
Oh yeah.
stigma around the Catholic Church, and
Yes.
all of those things. But that a lot of efforts are being made in that organization to revisit some of these long-standing ideas that they had around marriage, and and specifically around sex and sexuality. And I mean that's kind of, I guess that's the elephant in the room that has to be addressed, and you already touched on that, Yuval. But yeah, really, I mean, that for me is a huge myth that maybe even the wider Gaudiya world's not ready to kind of debunk yet. But yeah, this idea that the sexual side of a relationship is something kind of dangerous and dirty and harmful that we need to expunge as quickly as possible, and don't think about it and don't talk about it, and it's just an itch that needs to be scratched. It's just the rubbing of two urinals. There's so many terrible ways in which it's been explained, but I have to be kind of conscious of respecting my own privacy in that regard. But yeah, I would definitely say that this issue needs to be revisited, and there is actually a really important place for healthy sexuality, even amongst Gaudiya Vaishnav couples, even those who would claim to have a very strict or serious practice. There's something very powerful about that aspect of the relationship, and it's not the only part of the relationship, but it's something that creates a very intense level of intimacy, and it creates a strong bond between the couple, and then that flows through into the family, because the children see, mum and dad actually really love each other and enjoy each other's company, and that's a nice model to follow. And when I grow up, I want to be in a nice relationship like that. There's a lot of stability there, and there's a lot of instability within the Gaudiya world because of the stigma around sex. And again, I would refer people back to somebody like Radha Madhav to really get into the nitty gritty. But you know, I know people personally who are plagued by this problem, and because they don't have a healthy approach to sexuality, and I see this not to gripe too much, but I see this really interesting phenomenon that goes on in the Gaudiya world, which is that it seems that the people that are defending I guess, the idea of like sex being evil, the people that I see defending that idea the most are people that I know personally are struggling with that and actually wanting to, engage in that side of things. And yet, in the public eye, they're fighting against it, but behind closed doors, they, you know, they need it and they want it. And unfortunately, they're kind of being almost tormented by their own principles. Like, I need and I want this type of relationship, but I also will fight in the public eye against this type of thing, and it's very hypocritical, and it's just the perfect
Destruct-
Yeah.
recipe. It's a
Yeah.
recipe for self-destruction,
That's what
really.
led me, when I have had kind of been a little burnt out by this old Gaudiya way of being and started looking at Christianity again. The kind of churches I ended up going to were not the Catholic paradigm where there's monastics at the head, but other churches, Lutheran, Presbyterian, where the ministers are married. In fact, the church I currently go to, the two pastors are a couple, husband and wife. They have a, a daughter and a son, and I've met them all, and it really is the family is at the head, not the monastic, the one, right? So this something about hierarchy and something about power structure. It's not only about that, but I think that can relate back to Bhaktirasa's intuition that this power between man and woman, masculine and feminine, this relation between masculine and feminine is part of the key to understanding the relativity of family life, the absoluteness of family life.
Yeah. And and again, our what it is that we think is masculine and what it is we think is feminine. Because the thing that keeps running through my mind is this idea, because I just came out of another group and we were talking about this, so it's like drilling through my brain. The idea of how a woman needs to be protected by a man.
Mhm.
So there's like that has been like weaponized in such a way where women are seen as something so um, dangerous to themselves that, they're so lusty and they're so dangerous to themselves that they need to be protected by a man. What does a man do? He needs to protect themselves. I mean, he needs to protect the woman from themselves. But what this actually speaks to is how, because of a woman's sensitivity and what she brings to the world, what she can offer through the feminine side, through emotionality, through connectivity, through relationship, that those tender capacities, capabilities need to be protected in the man's world. And a guy coming as a hero or as the knight in shining armor, you know,
Right.
that whole image is is of him protecting the feminine. It's the masculine protecting the feminine because she is honorable. There is there's something within the feminine that is so um, tender and beautiful that it can easily get squashed in a masculine world. So to be protected means that the masculine is honoring the feminine and protecting that and allowing the feminine, which is what Deva Madhava was talking about in our last TED talk, that the masculine creates an environment where the feminine has the ability to flourish.
Mhm.
And everyone benefits from that. That to me is what it means to be for a woman to be protected by a man, not because she's so lusty that she needs to be protected from herself, or she's just going to like go down this dark, depraved, path and drag everyone with her. That is a twisted um, myth that I can't wait for that to be debunked. And I'm glad you young ones are
Yeah, I would. Sorry, I would say. I mean, I'd be interested to know even whether what the original Sanskrit term is that's been translated into protection, because
Mhm.
yeah, based on my experience and especially on the points you've raised, but it's more like the masculine is like a facilitator and kind of a caretaker, like creating a healthy environment for those things to flourish, not creating an environment where those things can't manifest, because that's not protect. Like, to protect something means to like take care of it and to like, even to like polish it and maybe even like put it on display. You could go in so many directions with that, but
honoring. It's a way of honoring.
yeah, to honor it and go, this is valuable and
Right.
necessary, as opposed to like, I mean, Deva Madhava made that point, like, this feminine emotional energy, for so long it's been viewed as like an inconvenience. It's like, it's inconvenient and annoying when it comes up because it gets in the way of the progress of the mission. And that's not, yeah.
Yeah,
Whereas
that actually
like you
is the
said,
mission.
Just don't know
the
what the mission
energy.
is.
Yeah.
Right.
We're missing the mission.
I want to add one thing to that conception because, I can say from my cultural experiences, I haven't been confronted so much with this idea of the lusty female. Really, what I've been confronted with is the idea that it's the man who's the lusty one. And yes, he's supposed to show off as a knight in shining armor, only so that once he gains the prize, he can exploit it and ravage it in unspeakable ways. So it becomes a competition between men to who can kind of, who can show more pomp and bravado to attract
Mhm.
the woman who needs protection just so he can then exploit on the backside. So it's a weird sort of there's a danger in both sides. There's a danger in saying that the man, his role is to protect, and yet what does that mean? As Balaram was saying. I looked up the Sanskrit word, not for protection, but I remember from a Sanskrit class I took back in college, the word for wife, bharya, comes from the root meaning to bear. And you can think of it in kind of two ways, maybe more, but in one sense, the husband bears the burden of the wife. But in a deeper sense, the wife, the woman, bears the emotions, bears the child, the fruit of the consummated relationship. So it's not just, it doesn't stop just between the two. It continues on to what is the fruit of their relationship, whether that is a child or whether that is some other thing. Yeah, but that idea of protection and that what does that really mean?
Yeah, what is it that we're protecting and for what purpose?
Yes.
Yeah.
For
I mean,
herself? Yeah, please, please.
I honestly think it means being a facilitator,
Mm,
that, in my experience, and not just for my wife, but for my children also, like facilitating their needs and their growth. That's kind of the way I protect them, is by actually allowing them to do those things and and making the effort to facilitate those things, to support them, even hopefully. Forgive me for this, me and my wife have this kind of ongoing. We have this ongoing kind of. I don't know if it's a joke, but it's kind of a humorous conversation, which is kind of like she comes up with the ideas and then I kind of manifest them. And I always end up playing the role of kind of the grumpy man who's like, oh no, what's she come up with now? But it always ends up being a good idea. And, and then I do end up doing a lot of the grunt work, and then that idea manifests, and it's actually a really good combination. We had, I would credit my wife with the idea to build the tiny house that we live in now, and a lot of changes that we've made have been through her kind of instigation and polite and not so polite prodding of me. And then I've kind of been, because I have a particular practical nature, I've been able to manifest certain things and facilitate things. And same for my children. And I feel like that's the way in which I protect them, is I actually facilitate their needs, and I can be kind of the helping hand that makes those things happen. So
The maintainer, right?
yeah.
Yeah, and also when you were speaking too, I was thinking of how in when institutions happen also, then they think that they need to protect the citizens. But it's the way it's going, a lot of times that protection is not what you're talking about. They don't provide the safe space for people to discover themselves and to be able to offer their, as an expression, their own talents, but to protect them more as a
Control.
control them.
Yeah.
That they feel that that's the way to protect. I'm going to protect them through rules, through regulations, through control, as opposed to unless you can somehow integrate those rules in such a way that it facilitates the expression, people coming into their own individuation.
Right.
But yeah, it's I do think I see it the same way, that protection means to create a safe space for individuation to happen.
And I love, Balaram, how you're talking about, you facilitate your wife's creativity, her imagination. And of course, it makes me think of Hinduism. We worship the goddess Saraswati. It's the goddess who reigns over knowledge, and she's depicted with a veena, with a guitar, right? A stringed instrument. And so many arts we consider the feminine arts, right? Music, singing, dancing. So many of the creative arts are considered to be effeminate.
Maybe all of them.
Right.
Creativity is aspect of the feminine.
Yeah. In fact, biologically speaking, I think it's for so many months that the embryo really is XX, and that Y chromosome is very late in the game, though maybe a biologist should weigh in on that to give more details. But yes, we all start off as double X chromosomes.
I wouldn't know. I'm just a simpleton.
I'll take your word on that. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a good. I like that comparison between an institution and a household, kind of a family unit. They are very similar, and yeah, I mean, it's not the purpose. I'm not here to kind of like ensure that my family all do a particular thing in order to serve a particular mission. I'm just really here to facilitate what they need. And a spiritual institution should be the same. and I don't want to go into institutional politics, but I mean, that's an institution should just be there to facilitate your sadhana and your personal spiritual journey. It's not there to make money, and even any projects that an institution does should only be to serve that purpose, not growth for growth's sake. So I like that comparison between the institution and the family unit.
Yeah, and last time you even mentioned, Yugala, that it's called the institution of marriage.
Yes.
So
Yes.
we're very united in the idea.
Yes. We have a few guests on, and I mean it's been 71 minutes. I don't know if you guys are ready to welcome some more voices into the dialogue.
Yeah, if anyone wants to join.
Yeah, so if either of our current guests wanna turn on cameras, and if you want to add in, though if you're not able to, no problem, we can continue rapping back and forth for a little while longer.
Yeah,
Hi, Swetadui Purarika. Nice to see you. Haribo.
Haribo. Good morning and good afternoon and good night over here. This is a strange, like meeting kind of like the whole world together. Yeah, I really loved this discussion, I mean, made me laugh a few times, and also very, very interesting. I really liked your exploration of what it means to protect the women or protect the feminine. Like, so beautiful. I've never heard that explanation. So, yeah. One thing like I want to say something about was regarding what Balaram was saying about considering like family life to be suffering, or that, like our scriptures kind of talk of that. It reminded me of, I can't really remember where in Srimad Bhagavatam, but it says something about how women and children are like jackals, jackals and wolf or something like that. You know,
I'm so
yes.
sorry.
Yeah, I mean,
Gosh.
when you read that, it almost like you believe it, like, oh yeah, it's like they're always howling and troubling the men and, all of that. But what I was thinking is that it seems to me like it's a pendulum swing, like, from being like overly materialistic, like into the bodily concept of life, and then rejecting, kind of like what Balaram was also saying about the Shamanas. They were kind of an extreme, like
Aesthetic.
other side from the Brahmanas, rejecting everything. So to me, this seems kind of like that, like pendulum swing between like overly materialistic, and then you just say like, oh, all of this is a problem, and like that. And I think like to come to the middle, you kind of have to like swing to the other side, and then you come to the middle. So I was thinking like maybe this is kind of, they're like facilitating that, because, even Srimad Bhagavatam, it's not like everything is like all together. Like as we read, it's kind of like you progress through the cantos and reach the 10th canto where the essence of Srimad Bhagavatam is given, which is like very different, like much different from calling a family life or the intimate relationship to be something bad, negative. Yeah, so those are some thoughts I had regarding.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you, Soitari. I mean, I don't want to answer that exclusively, because I've been appreciating Yugal and Bhaktirasa kind of fueling the conversation, but just, I mean, a couple of thoughts came to my mind, because I've thought about these points as well. I mean, one thing I've learned through kind of a deeper kind of dive into Bhagavatam and what we, the way that we interpret Shastra, we know that different parts of the Bhagavatam were written for different audiences. So there are definitely aspects of the Bhagavatam, or certain shlokas that really emphasize like what you might call die-hard renunciation. But and the way that I've understood it is that the intention of the author is actually to like kind of bait a particular audience. So those who are already living a life of intense renunciation, sannyas or something like that, they would hear those things and they're like, oh yes, this book's saying what I already believe in. Let me read some more. And then of course they'll get into the actual, bhakti aspects of it, which, and our dear Padmanabha Maharaj was making that point yesterday that, really the whole Bhagavatam is focused around, a very particular part of the 10th canto. So every other part of the Bhagavatam has to serve that purpose. So, because otherwise, if you hear, certain statements and you take them out of context, then yeah, it's kind of fueling, other ideas. So at least, I mean, that's the way I choose to interpret those statements. But also like, those things might be true whenever we view things as being separate from Krishna. And that's kind of the full circle that I'm trying to come to in my own relationship, is not viewing like my, need to be married and and all of my, all of these desires and things as being separate from my practice. I want to, bring all of those things together. But as long as I see anything as separate from Krishna or separate from my bhakti practice, then yes, they would be obstacles. I mean that I think that's a fair point to make, because I'm taking a dualistic approach. So if I see like my desire to have an intimate relationship as something independent of Krishna, then absolutely it's an obstacle. But therein I think lies the solution, that I need to change the way in which I view that relationship. That's kind of my thoughts based on what you said, Swetadri. So thanks for adding to the discussion.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense actually. It reminds me of like how I think Srila Prabhupada would say that too, like Srimad Bhagavatam is like attractive to everybody, like whoever, if you like politics, there is politics, and different areas like that. So yeah, like it makes sense what you were saying. I was also thinking that it's also when you see something as a suffering, like family life in this case, it's kind of like seeing the problem to be outside, like kind of not taking responsibility and saying like, oh, this is the problem, like instead of seeing what we can learn from it and how we can grow.
Yeah, different ways to approach Shastra as kind of like a jumping off, a meditative point, just thinking about these things meditatively. Like, what can I draw from this lesson? How am I a jackal? How am I this way? We all have the potential. We all have the potential to be jackals. So how am I a jackal? I wouldn't want to be that way, to myself or to anyone else. And so we can always draw lessons from everything. And there is toxic masculinity and there is toxic femininity. So how am I expressing these things in toxic ways that are obstacles for myself, obstacles for my partner? I mean, I've seen some women who are very mean to their husbands, and some husbands that are very mean to their wives. You know, something's going on there. So it's we can be these toxic ways to each other, whether we're partners, you know, marital partners or not, but to look within ourselves, how am I emulating this, and get the opportunity to
Yeah,
change that.
I'm the first to say I'm guilty of that, and I know that I still do that to my partner, and then when that comes up, you know, and I have this kind of like these independent desires just to, you know, to enjoy for myself, and then, you know, then that makes me frustrated, and I realize, no, I need to just work on I'm approaching this in completely the wrong way, and because of, yeah, I'm just acting like a jackal. And I have to change my perception of the way that I view these things. You know, whereas if I'm just viewing my relationship as kind of like a facility for my independent kind of selfish desires, then absolutely it'll be suffering, and that. But it's not the activity that needs to change. It's the mentality that we bring into that kind of environment.
We
At
we
least that's my.
can we can all work towards becoming transcendental jackals.
So then we can, I guess, maybe be crushed by Balaram's plow or something like that. Do it bad enough. Yeah, I know for my part, like I'll become very aware when I'm doing that, when I'm heckling, when I'm needling, you know, usually for me it happens through my words mostly, and through language, whether that's body language, facial expression, a tone of voice, signaling some sort of condescension, some sort of bad negative judgment. Um, and I don't sit well with that afterwards, you know, like I'll go there and then I'll realize I'm going there. And if I stay there, it's not peaceful. Like if I try to go to sleep in that state, it's a horrible sleep. So it's like it's so important to hold space for each other, to realize like my feminine side needs contained too, so that you can teach me how to cry. You can teach me how to not be so gruff all the time, you know, and I think it's working slowly, you know. I've been able to get some more tears out recently that, you know, Balaram, I don't know if this is true for you, but I went years without crying. After I
Yeah,
learned to cry for
pretty.
Krishna, then I went years without crying, and it was not pleasant.
I mean, yeah, probably not, you know, not even that many times that I've cried in the last 20 years. And I remember this, you know, just recently when Maharaj was staying with me, and he's like, I'm still waiting for those tears, Balaram. Like, you know, you've got to let them out sometime. And I don't know if I'm quite ready to make a public show of that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, that's an aspect of my personality that I buried so deeply, and I've kind of introspected as to why that is. But when you've done that for so long, you know, it's also going to take some time to uncover that. But yeah, I mean, that's a huge benefit of being in an intimate relationship with somebody of a feminine nature, is that, you know, you get exposed to that, and you know, and then slowly over time you realize actually it's okay, and probably I need to embrace that more. And there's this nice point that Richard Rohr makes, and I'm still kind of contemplating it, but he's saying, like, as a society, you know, women have very successfully embraced their masculine side, you know, and maybe we could say too much at some point. That's a whole nother subject matter. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think it's actually a huge necessity. But then we as men, we're really like lacking. We're really running behind. You know, we as men need to embrace our feminine side culturally, but we still haven't got there. And I still am.
We're starting to, though.
I'm starting to.
That's what this whole thing is. This whole thing about bringing in the divine feminine. It is about that. We have embraced the masculine side for so long, and it's.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a strong toxic masculine culture just in society in general. And, you know, the nature of my work is I interact with a lot of what you might call manly men, you know, truck drivers and tradesmen, and, you know, they're like they're like the acharyas of toxic masculinity. And you can see, yeah, culturally in the West, we've got a long way to go before that, you know, that's really resolved. Whereas we know many traditional cultures that, you know, that men had a much more healthy approach to their feminine side, and we're kind of like trying to catch up.
And if I can add, you know, I spent some time in Southeast Asia. The men that I saw there are so much more willing to embrace their affectionate sides. I mean, in Thailand, it was not uncommon to see two grown male friends walking down the street holding hands. And this has nothing to do with sexuality in some sense, you know, of course,
Affection.
depending on how you, yes. Say again, please.
It's affection.
Affection, right. And, you know, you wouldn't be caught dead doing that on the streets in America. You would be sexualized immediately. And of course, I mean, that could lead into so much more discussion about the way we dress, you know, the way we talk, all of that. But somehow there's that there are some cultural behaviors that have been preserved there that do safeguard softness and affection.
I mean, you see that in India as well, but of course, now at least the parts of India I've been to, the culture is kind of the other way, where men can kind of hold hands and dance in the street together practically, but you'll never see men and women touching. And I mean, I understand there's a reason for that, but I think there are particular influences as well. Whereas the little that I've understood about kind of more ancient kind of Indian Vaishnava culture, just, you know, historically it wasn't so closed off like that. I feel like it was more balanced. And I mean, that's another subject matter in itself. Probably we won't have time for that. But I think, yeah, there was, even traditionally, there was a much more healthy approach, just both between men and women and between, yeah, people of the same gender. And we've just become quite shut off as a society. Although we're, you know, it's improving, but
yeah, I think we're on the way. We're on the way.
Mhm.
This is the next wave, the evolution of our culture will be to embrace the feminine.
It kind of leads me back to the topic that we thought we were going to talk about last time with Dave Amon about governance. You know, I can't help but think politically, geopolitically, how much imperialism has overshadowed those beautiful cultural behaviors, and now is teaching this gross toxic masculine way of being all around the world. I see that in, proto-nationalist movements and, you know, um, everything, our country is the best country, whatever, our religion is the best religion. And that is certainly not what the Hinduism I was introduced to. It was so accepting of differences, so accommodating, um and it's sad to see that, somehow we need to redeem politics and redeem governance.
Yes. There you go. That's what you should be doing, Hugo.
Go for it, you go.
It's your calling. It's your calling.
I'm not much of a politician myself, but I think I'd vote for you.
The politics of love, right? That's about it. I've been getting a lot of I don't know, answers in the last few days because of course I have so much fear with the current political regime in America. And the more I react out of that fear, it's like the worse the situation becomes. So one of my current practice has been actually a Buddhist metta loving kindness meditation. So if I think of someone who's I see as causing big problems, then I try to bring that person to mind and imagine them happy, imagine them loved and cared for, and see myself in that person. Because isn't that how God is seeing that person? Instead of this right and wrong, my side and your side.
Yeah. Yeah, and to always see ourselves in that situation as well, because we can think we would never go there. But, with the Nazis and that, I probably would have been a Nazi at that time, We think we wouldn't, but very potentially with the pressures that there were with this, if everything was the same, I
Yeah.
probably would have been. So these things that we find horrible and somehow outside of ourselves, could really just be bringing up something that's within ourselves that we need to look at.
Mhm. Yeah.
Again, like the jackal. How am I a jackal? How am I actually emulating this trait that I'm finding fault with in that other person?
Mhm.
Is
Yeah.
anything there?
Yeah, that's not something a man would typically do if he's embracing his toxic masculinity. It's always about like, I don't like that thing, I'm going to fight against it and try to get rid of it. And
Yes.
trying to actually learn like empathy as a man, it takes a little bit of practice to be honest. And
Yeah.
whereas now it seems kind of straightforward, but I do feel like, yeah, if you're like me and you haven't been exposed to your kind of feminine side from a young age, then to be empathetic, you have to actually, you kind of have to be trained. Unfortunately, it's a
And
shame that I wasn't raised by that, but my family culture is sort of one of like not talking about your emotions, and if somebody has a problem, you just find like the mechanical fix to that problem, and that makes the problem go
Usually,
away.
except it doesn't, right? Because in my
Except it doesn't.
family,
Yeah.
in my
And
family,
then,
the mechanical fix was always this or this.
yeah.
it's been quite confronting for me to realize that, I inherited that trait and I don't want to pass that on to my children. I want them, you know, fortunately, I mean, my daughter is naturally empathetic, but, I can see there's that tendency in my son, and I want to, I I have to obviously become the better version of it myself before he can embrace that. But it just like, you know, letting him know that it's okay to be vulnerable and to be empathetic, and unfortunately there is a bit of a mainstream culture of kind of promoting toxic masculinity. It's just this constant kind of fluctuation in society, because there was a time when masculinity was really downtrodden and downplayed, and then there was kind of a crisis, and then the rebuttal to that is to bring back toxic masculinity. And I don't know, somehow as Westerners we're completely hopeless at balancing things. We need it to be one or the other. We need it to be, you know, liberal or conservative.
Western or Eastern, even.
Yeah. We really fail at like moderating ourselves and going, you know, we need a bit of both.
Yeah, and it's the toxicity that we need to address, not the, you know,
Not the
not the
quality.
masculine, not the feminine, but the toxicity.
Mhm.
How am I using this thing as a weapon? How am
Yeah.
I using this actually in like the broadest sense of things? How am I using this to as an obstacle really in my relationship with God? How is this not serving love? That, you know, what makes something toxic is it moves against love. It moves against our relationship in love. So that's what toxicity is. So the more we can choose those behaviors and choose how we see the world as a way that realigns our aim, our behavior with our goal of loving and being love in the world and representing that, then it takes it out of the realm of toxicity, whether no, regardless of what it is, whether it's masculine, feminine, that won't matter. The toxicity is what needs to be addressed.
Mhm.
And that's whatever it is that moves me against love is what's toxic.
Somehow you have me thinking about the body and how it eliminates toxins, right, through its digestive system and then the elimination system. And these toxins are just, they only become toxic if you don't eliminate them, right? So we need real ways, kind of well-trodden ways and creative ways of removing what's the unnecessary bits and integrating the healthy bits, the rest.
Mhm. Yeah. Digestion is integration. Yeah. Letting go of those things that do not serve.
Yes. Extraction, elimination, and retention and integration.
Yeah.
And how that's relative, you know, for one person, a situation is toxic, and for another person, they thrive in that. So much of that comes back to the point that the Srimad Bhagavatam speaks to so many different various natures. You know, of course, there's room for sannyas. Of course, there's room for female sannyas.
Yeah.
You know, and yet, how do those come to be? Of course, they were born of a family themselves. So it's kind of, it is a special thing. It's a special thing. It can only come through family life.
Yeah. And as long as that thing is served, you know, now I'm sound like beating a dead horse, but as long as that thing is serving love, as long as sannyas actually is serving love and opening their heart in such a way that they are becoming more of a loving person, then by all means embrace that. If by entering a relationship with a partner a committed relationship is actually going to serve love, is going to open my heart and make me a more loving person and get me more in touch with who I am and my own needs and my own psychology and how I can use all of that to go towards love, then that is the path. That's what we should embrace, to accept those things that are favorable and to reject those things that are not favorable. So favorable means to move towards love. What will move me in this moment more towards love?
Yeah,
Some
I think
kind of
it's
renunciation or some kind of, you know.
that's really important, and I mean, especially for those of us that have been practicing for a while, you do really get to that point where you know what situation suits you best, and when you feel that you're in a balanced enough situation to practice bhakti properly. And if you feel the need to be renounced and live as a sannyasi, then by all means.
Yes, there's a
I
purpose
mean,
for it.
yeah. There was definitely a time where I was absolutely convinced that monasticism is just something that has no place anymore. It's irrelevant. And I think if I hadn't met somebody like Padmanabha Swami, you know, and then say, oh, this is actually somebody who is very well situated to be a sannyasi and a monastic. And I don't know if you'll see this, you end up watching this or not, Maharaj, but thanks for thanks for renewing my faith, because I was starting to do a bit of a Martin Luther and like, oh, we need to just get rid of the celibate clergy altogether. But when you meet somebody like him, or my other friend Father Cashin, who stayed with us, and you meet somebody who's just totally perfectly situated in monastic life. It's beautiful. And
Yeah.
and I even look at it and I think, wow, I kind of wish I could have that simplicity, but not that I want to change my situation. But it's funny. I even had that attraction from a young age, not to live monastic life, but just to be around people who practice it, because there was something really beautiful about it. So although I'm kind of harping on about how awesome it is to be married, there is that kind of beautiful simplicity there in the monastic life.
Well,
And
it goes
I think
full circle, right? Because you start celibate and monastic in a sense as a child, as a youth, and then sannyas brings it back full circle. Now I'm a
yeah,
wise youth.
but it really just comes down to what best suits the individual. And like Bhaktirasa was saying, what's serving love? Does it serve my does it serve my pursuit of divine love to be in a relationship, or is it better? Well, only you can know. And that's I guess that's why I feel like we need to stop sort of overemphasizing this idea that the end goal is sannyas, because for some people it's not. And I've got it saved I was trying to find it somewhere on my phone. I've got saved this beautiful image of the late Karnamrita and his wife Akshin Siddhi, and they're just like sitting on the couch holding hands. And this was just not long before Karnamrita passed away. And I just thought, that's so beautiful. And if that's me and my wife in my end days, I'll feel like I've been doing something right. I don't want to aspire for anything else. And call me an attached greenhuster if you want to, but I would consider that perfection. If me and my wife are still together, practicing bhakti together after all that time, when our bodies are failing us, I would I would think that I've done something right, and I'm not aspiring for anything else. So sorry, but you won't be meeting Balaram Swami in this life. It's not going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not the end, aha. The end goal is bhakti, is love. So whatever it takes to serve that, that is the goal. That is the highest path to take. Whatever path it is that draws us closer to that. That is the way we need to walk in the world. And again, that we have to understand who we are and our nature and our humanity and our psychology. All of that is within the Bhakti project. It's not something separate. It's all part of the same thing. To be able to choose love, I have to know who it is. Who am I? How can I actually choose love where I am in this moment to come? What is love? And how can I move closer towards that, closer towards my potential to be that. So that takes a lot of knowledge, a lot of self-knowledge, a lot of introspection, and that takes other people. It takes relationships, because that is Svetadweep, right? That's where we find ourselves. Where we lose ourselves is where we find ourselves, and we lose ourselves in relationship. So we are reflections for each other. And what are you going to say, Yugal?
Well, I would love to read something, and then maybe we're getting to that time. So this doesn't have to be the last word, but it could be a nice way of beginning to close the conversation for now. And it was a reading today from church that I just was able to watch virtually, didn't go in person this morning, but it speaks to this point. So the passage is from 1 Corinthians 13. It reads, I may speak in different languages, whether human or even of angels, but if I don't have love, I am only a noisy bell or a ringing cymbal or a jackal. I may have the gift of prophecy. I may understand all secrets and know everything there is to know. And I may have faith so great that I can move mountains. But even with all this, if I don't have love, I'm nothing. I may give away everything I have to help others, and I may even give my body as an offering to be burned. But I gain nothing by doing all of this if I don't have love. Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous. It does not brag, and it is not proud. Love is not rude. It is not selfish, and it cannot be made angry easily. Love does not remember wrongs done against it. Love is never happy when others do wrong, but it is always happy with the truth. Love never gives up on people. It never stops trusting, never loses hope, and never quits. Love will never end, but all those gifts will come to an end, even the gift of prophecy, the gift of speaking in different kinds of languages, and the gift of knowledge. These will all end, because knowledge and these prophecies we have are not complete. But when perfection comes, the things that are not complete will end. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, and I made plans like a child. When I became a man, I stopped those childish ways. It is the same with us. Now we see God as if we are looking at a reflection in a mirror. But then, in the future, we will see him right before our eyes. Now I know only a part, but at that time I will know fully as God has known me. So these three things continue: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love.
Amen.
Amen.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yes. Sounds like a perfect way to draw in this conversation. Yeah.
Balaram, thank you so much for being here. I feel like we could go on for hours longer. Swetadweep, thank you for joining. It's always so lovely to have you. And Bhakti Ras, as always, I wouldn't be here without you. So thank you.
You go for the austerities you went through today to get here. I appreciate your presence. Thank you very much. Thank you, Balaram. Sweet to do it. And Patrick.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for letting me kind of flesh this out a little bit. And this is just a conversation. It's probably going to go on for years, but I hope that other people will start having this conversation as well.
So,
Yes.
thank you very much.
Hare Krishna.